Hello and welcome to my video on Bobby Parker's Working Class Voodoo. This is the book, poetry collection that came out in 2018. From looking inside the book, on one of the first pages I can see that this is Bobby Parker's 5th book. I don't know if those previous 4, if one or more was a pamphlet of poetry or perhaps they were all collections. This is a slim volume with some really powerful poetry inside of it, and I'm going to read a couple of poems and talk about the collection as a whole and my thoughts on it, and read some of the reviews, talk about the book, the design and the recommendations. So Bobby Parker, the first poem I'm going to read from this collection is actually the second one, and I think this is a good introduction to his style and subject matter. King of Eggs. When we tried to quit drinking again, I got so bored I would throw eggs onto the street late at night after the clubs had closed. They weren't rotten or anything, they were perfectly good eggs. My usual target was drunk lads, shouting awful things at girls walking home alone. There was a tall fence around our property. Since I couldn't see where my eggs landed, I aimed for voices, avoiding the odd passing car, hoping for a headshot. It gave me a silly buzz and made Katie laugh. That's all I wanted. We rented a house with a big garden. There was a pond surrounded by lawn ornaments, birds, dogs, and a small boy pissing. Creepy in the moonlight. Sometimes I felt quite mad, standing on the wet grass with a cold egg in each hand, watching the neighbours' lights go out one by one. Often the street was dead, but I threw eggs anyway, listening for the sound of them smacking the pavement. So satisfying, like ice cracking or popping the cork from a bottle. Then I would go back in the house to stare into the light of the empty fridge, the way I stare into open churches, eventually creeping upstairs to look down from the bedroom window, all at the shattered shells and glistening yolks on the silent road, astonished by my work and slightly afraid. So that's the second poem of Parker's collection, Working Class Voodoo. King of Eggs. And to explore that poem in some detail, I would say that the form of it is interesting and consistent throughout the book. There's a review on the back, or an endorsement on the back, that alludes to this as well. Well, they refer to the verse style as being reporterage. I maybe said that wrong. It's like reportage, basically, is what they're saying. And they call him bulletin. Maybe I'm messing that up, but we'll talk about that when I get to his endorsement. But for me, they read like stream of consciousness, though if one is to relate the idea of stream of consciousness to James Joyce's Ulysses, the Penelope chapter, he preferred interior monologue, and well, that's by the by. But in this poem, as in many of the poems, the lines aren't necessarily written in units of sense, though you could say that. They're certainly free verse lib, there's no consistent meter, and there's a serious lack of punctuation. Which again, I don't say that as in that's a bad thing, but full stops are used. Usually the lines are very short. There are examples of stanzas in other poems, but I would say the general style of the verse is these long, short-ish lined poems that are sprawling and very affecting. General themes within this book that are explored, and there are some absolutely brilliant arresting, thought-provoking, disturbing poems in this collection that really grab one by the throat, I think you could say. And one of the reasons that that's the case is because, of course, Bobby Parker is clearly a talented and skillful poet, but it's the themes that he explores in his verse, and they include addiction, abuse, sexual, mental, desperation, and a real microscopic look at those that one could describe as being in the gutter. I think that's fair to say in occasions. That's not to say this is a depressing read, far from. It's a read whereby the reader, I believe, will feel like they're transported into this world. It's very urban, it's very grimy, there's almost like a Victorian film to it, but in the 21st century. So let me read another one. Like I say, there are many that I would love to read, but because I'm putting this on the internet, I'm reviewing it. And look, I never know who's gonna, students or whatever. But there's some brilliant poems in here, some crazy titles for poems. But I'll let you discover those yourself. I'll leave a link where you can buy the book in the little, the little description bar at the bottom. Okay, let me go to page 25. The poet Tim Liardo always used to say something about there's nothing more boring than seeing a poet flick through the pages of a book. He used to say that all the time at readings, and it was something that somebody else said, and he's got a point. But this poem's called, not that one, that one's a bit too visceral, a bit too brutal and physical. Here we go, 42. And that's not to say that last poem, I rate that last poem very highly, and I rate this poem highly. And this is just a taste. But it's probably very obvious now that yes, much of the language is explicit, and I'm not going to say taboo, but not spoken about, perhaps. But the last poem and this one don't really have that, though. Of course, there's an edge to that, because that is inherently, it would seem, the type of verse Parker writes. At least it is in this collection, but I would assume it is in his others too. Okay, nothing scary. After we broke up, she gave me a slice of birthday cake she baked herself. Sorry, let me start that again. Nothing scary. After we broke up, she gave me a slice of birthday cake she baked for herself. A simple jam sponge dusted with icing sugar. I didn't want to eat it or throw it away. Both felt wrong, so I kept it in a clear plastic tub in my parents' shed. 3 years later, the cake is still there behind the lawnmower, worshipped by spiders. Still sort of fresh looking and saintly in that tub. I have considered various moonlight rituals, most of which end with bright puke gushing through my fingers. Her junky boyfriend's burnt spoons drooping like ripe sunflowers. That tragic, magic cake. The way my parents' shed lurches from the weight of broken old machines. My God, it's almost too sweet. So that's the poem Nothing Scary, and there are some consistent, feels wrong to say characters, but personae or persons that come up in the poem, and I imagine a reader would assume that they are people in Parker's life. They're written about as such, and they reoccur. And they're very touching poems. And I say all of that to say there is like a sort of relationship, but it's not It doesn't tell a singular narrative is what I'm trying to say, but you'd have probably guessed that, it being a collection of poetry rather than a novella or a novel or a verse narrative akin to Grief is a Thing with Feathers. It's not like that. Yeah, it's published by Offord Road Books. I'd never heard of them before, but it's a beautiful book, very nicely done. The cover kind of reminds me a bit of Faber. Many endorsements, which is brilliant to see, and 3 of which, perhaps more, are Faber poets, successful Faber poets. On the front of the book you have Richard Scott saying, like Anne Sexton after 9 pints, he is essential reading. I must confess, I've never actually really read Anne Sexton, which I know is bad, but I've read a lot of Anne Carson and I enjoy her work, though I don't think they're too similar, though Anne Sexton is known as being a pioneer, I believe, in the confessional poetry that is sort of seen as originating with what's his name? Robert Lowell, and then of course going to new heights with Sylvia Plath. But yeah, that's Richard Scott. He wrote a collection called Soho, which the poet lent me this book, a brilliant poet in Maidstone. Just lived everywhere along the country. Yeah, really brilliant guy, good friend, lent me this, and he also lent me Richard Scott's Soho. I prefer, and this has nothing to do with my sexuality, far from, because both blur the lines, but I do prefer this one, Richard Scott's book, electric pink cover, beautiful design, similar in some ways to Andrew Macmillan's Physical, very erotic, very physical, very precise. And that's what Scott said about Parker. And then the other, wow, 12 minutes. The other review I would like to read, and there are many, and they're brilliant, and I find this collection to be refreshing. Feels like the wrong word, because it can be so hard to read at times, but it feels authentic. And reading the blurb here, I can see that Parker was born in '82 and is from Worcestershire. Shout out Worcestershire. That's the home, I believe, of Geoffrey Hill, one of my absolute heroes, King Arthur and Mercia and all that good stuff. But the Daljit Nagla quote reads, "All hail the unlegislated king of Kidderminster, the royalty of backstreet seamen, bad whiskey, cheap drugs and supermarkets. No other poet tells it like it is by telling it like it isn't for most of us. No one else tells it quite so slant or reclined. Parker is bulletin, reportage pumped out with bad breath and hangovers. Above all, pathos." Fantastic review. Wow, from such a successful poet. A powerful review. Little mini endorsement. And I agree with a lot of it. Again, that endorsement said quite candidly the things that maybe I've been skipping around, that you will find in this book. Pathos. When I looked on Google, I had an idea of what it meant, but I wanted to double check. So according to Uncle Google, pathos, a quality that invokes pity or sadness, Greek for suffering, and often one will find pathos alongside ethos, ethics basically, and logos, logic, as a way to interpret a text, at least in ancient Greek, with thinkers and rhetoricians of old that have had a huge influence on our culture here in the West. But alas, I think I'll leave it there. It's a really good collection. I'm very grateful to my friend for lending it to me. and I encourage you to read it yourself. If you like contemporary poetry, if you like hard-hitting stuff, if you've read Richard Scott Soho, I imagine you will like this. It is similar to that in many ways, but maybe a little bit more cutthroat, I think is fair to say. Bobby Parker, never heard of him, but he's doing bits, he's won some stuff, and I hope he's doing okay. If he ever listens to this, I hope he's being kind to himself, and he's writing, and he's getting on okay, with as positive a mindset as he can have. And that's a message I would send to all of you and to myself. You know, be kind to yourself. Life's hard, but we do the best we can with it. And if we can create some artwork that acts as an expression of our fears and ambitions, then we're at least doing something productive. And what else is there to do other than that? Cheers.